Oh, that'd be great.
What's the number?
Oh, the number? Wait 1 second. I'm starting it.
Yeah, send to me. I'm a Slack. But now they can. Yeah, the person sounds do you hear that echo with like famous notation or can you play it sound?
Yeah.
So let's just look so like ever since like this effect in mass.
Hi.
You want to read about them? Oh yeah. So I can start doing that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, do you have a Zoom?
Oh,
Yeah. You want to? It's the 899-496. Oh, okay. So that's the internet thing. Let's go to.
Oh, yeah.
Let's like connect to. We're good. I think we can take care of it. Yeah. What's that? Yeah, and then.
Do you need that also?
I didn't. Wait, why is it doing that? And then as soon as can we play the video?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's not working. Okay. Okay. Back in plan. Let's like play through here then. Yeah.
I mean, I don't hear it.
Okay.
Coming out of the machine.
Yeah, sure. Let's do this. So like, let's disconnect. I'll do it here. It's okay. Not a big deal. I have things in these shoes. Okay, that's very good. This is internal or is it speaker? Okay, so let's just leave. Oh, try it again. Yeah.
Like, I don't know if Zoom can hear it as well. I mean, this looks okay to me. Yeah, if they can hear on Zoom, then it should be good. Okay, all right, cool. Yeah, we can do.
Time for you, and I'm delighted to introduce Kristen Grauman. She graduated from here in 2006, right? And has had a wonderful career at UT Austin. And then now she's doing the thing that many computer vision people are doing, splitting her time between Facebook, their lab, and also UT Austin. She always does wonderful stuff.
Awesome, thank you. And hi, everyone, nice to see you here today. This is a talk about audiovisual learning, and the specific emphasis is on 3D environments. So we're gonna be talking a lot about the spatial effects and the room effects on sound and what vision can bring into that understanding. So I'm gonna start with an example, play this video to make the point that if you put the same sound in different physical places, you get a very different result. So here we go. This is one drum kit in 5 different spaces. Okay, so I hope you could see how, same content, very different perceptual experience as far as what we're going to hear, and it has everything to do with what are those materials in the room, what's the geometry of the space. And so we're thinking about ways to learn on the audiovisual side about how sound interacts with space, and motivated by 2 things. On the one hand, augmented reality and virtual reality, where we can think of new applications, new problems for making immersive sound, generating immersive sound, or even transferring sounds to new places, as well as issues and possibilities in speech enhancement. And I'll show you examples of those today. And we're also motivated by robotics, where fundamentally understanding of space is so important for being able to map and navigate, and also to understand dynamic objects by localizing sound sources. So these are big picture kind of motivating areas why if we have really good AV audiovisual models for spatial sound and sound in spaces, will have a lot to do with it. So let me get right into kind of some baseline knowledge or setting for what we need to think about in this area. And on the one, when you talk about spatial effects in audio, there's 2 sides of this story. On the one side, you have the environment itself. And so factors from the 3D environment that affect what you hear, we just saw in the examples, right? The geometry of that space, what's the shape, where are the walls, where's the big furniture? The materials in the room, is it a smooth wood floor, or is it a shaggy carpet, big curtains? And then the position of the source and the receiver. So where am I with respect to any sound making object? Those are all things that, by the physics and the shape of this space are going to affect what I hear. And then the other side of it is my body, or the listener's body. And so here we know that once we have more than one microphone, we'll be able to receive the spatial cues of the sound. Just think of our 2 ears and how the time delay between when the sound reaches one ear versus the other, the strength of the sound in either ear, as well as even details coming from the shape of our 3D ears, are all going to give us signals about the 3D locations of objects, sources. Okay, so we'll be thinking about how these play a role in the way we set up the problems we're looking at. And the other kind of background knowledge that I wanted to make sure and define is what's called a room impulse response. So room impulse response is a transfer function that tells you how the sound is transferred from a source to a receiver. So it's parameterized by a source and receiver position according to the room that it's in. And so what it consists of is this function. So this is one example of a room impulse response, RIR, that consists of that direct sound, the thing that you're actually listening to, followed by some early reflections bouncing around, and then a long tail of reverberation of just all the movement of these of the sounds throughout the 3D space. And we'll be making use of this kind of function to do both rendering of audio in a simulator I'll show you in a second, as well as how we think about, okay, what's happening to the sound as a function of the visual environment when we build ML models to try and recover the underlying sound or room properties. Yeah. Okay. So the remainder of this talk, I've got 3 parts to show, and I'm going to go from left to right here in the kind of the scope. So we'll look first at learning about the 3D surroundings themselves. Then I'll talk about introducing speakers or other object sounds and modeling the effects of that speech from the 3D environment. And then finally, we'll go to this case where it's very cluttered, there's many sounds, and we're still caring about how these many sounds in the environment work together. So let's look about learning the 3D surroundings. And here's where I want to introduce a simulator platform that we developed called Sound Spaces. This we first introduced in 2020, and just last NeurIPS at 2022, we upgraded it to make it a lot more flexible and used for real-time kind of arbitrary source receiver positions. So what is it? Well, you may know well in this embodied intelligence group how influential and valuable visual 3D environments have been for our community. Things like Matterport 3D, Replica, Gibson, HM3D, others. That'll give pre-scanned environments. So real environments, but that have been scanned such that you have a 3D model and you can pick your viewpoint and move virtual robots anywhere through these spaces. So think of sound spaces as the audio counterpart for that, because now we can take in any of those 3D environments and render highly realistic sound, binaural sound, ambisonic sound, multi-channel sound in real time for any waveform you want. So now you have the ability to place not just a camera in these environments, but also, 2 or more microphones. And so that means you can think about putting any source and receiver combination together, like putting a sound source here in the middle of the room and then measuring what it'll sound like anywhere else. And so this sound space is done with state-of-the-art bidirectional ray tracing in order to achieve this kind of realistic sound, modeling everything from the materials, transmission through the materials, and so on. Okay, and it's habitat compatible. This is a fast rendering platform out of FAIR. All right, so we have sound spaces, and this is going to allow a number of the training and demonstration things I'll show you next. And we'll also, along the way, be testing on real data too. So we'll think of it as a very valuable, hopefully, training setting, as well as something we could use for sim to real transfer. So if you've already been in the room, you've kind of seen this video. So we'll do it maybe briefly one more time. This is to give you a taste of what sound spaces is like. We have the egocentric video or view on the left of some virtual camera moving through the space, the top-down map of that space on the right. And this is just to show you how the sound will vary as the camera moves around when there's a couple different sound spaces, sources placed. So there is a fire alarm in there. There's also a piano playing as you move. And if you listen to this with headphones, it'll be on your left. It's getting louder as you pass it. And then same with this dreadful fire alarm till we get to the room where it's going off, and I'll stop. Okay, so this is the kind of simulation where we'll achieve putting together Matterport 3D in that case with sound spaces. And I think the example hints at what we first did with this simulator, which is to study audiovisual navigation. So there's something making noise in the environment. You haven't even mapped the environment yet. Can you intelligently go find it? And in fact, we've run a couple challenges now in the umbrella of the Embodied AI workshop at CVPR, and the current edition is live. So if you want to tackle the audiovisual navigation, you can participate in this challenge. All right, so that was kind of an environment with, sounding objects going on in the real world as they would in the real world. And here I'll show you a slightly different example where we can think about emitting sound and listening to the results. So an active agent may want to do this. And even here we'll see as we move in the same format. Do you hear that clicking sound? So that's a frequency sweep, very fast one, being issued again and again and again. And as it goes through this sound environment with the space shape that it has, you can hear the difference in the results, right? And again, to fully hear it, you want multi-channel audio in both your ears, but you could hear even the intensity changing as the shape of the walls around you would change. And that's where the source and the receiver are at the same place, right? And we can render for this condition as well. And this is exactly what's behind, of course, echolocation by people or animals that try to emit a sound and then listen for the results to understand the spatial environment. All right, well, people, animals, also apparently Daredevil. Okay, so this is a movie that my students introduced me to because of the topical relevance, because this person, this character was blind, but by doing things like, hitting the side of that gate and listening to those echoes result could really understand the shape of the scene, scary or otherwise, right? And so we take that motivation for this next model I want to show you, which we call visual echoes. And the idea was, can we learn representations that account for this tight link between the spatial environment, the 3D setting, and what we see and hear in order to learn better image representation. And so we think this would be important, possibly very valuable for more spatial tasks. So tasks could be depth prediction, surface normals, navigation, where you really care about the relative layout and shape of the space around you. And we're going to try to achieve this through echolocation. And I'll give you more detail in a second, with the key insight that this might be a way to supervise, self-supervise a representation by acoustically interacting with the world. Interacting because you're going to emit sounds and then listen to the results. And so it's kind of like probing the environment as you move about to build up a representation of how these two cues are working together. So I just showed you that example in sound spaces where we were generating echoes in the environment. So we're doing that now here to generate a training set. So here's an example of a 3D replica scene. That's one of the 3D environment data sets. And we can do this frequency sweep, do it at any position in the environment and do it at any orientation in the environment. So imagine then collecting training data like this that you see on the top right, where it shows the RGB you would observe in this direction, as well as the depth. And then those two matrices are the spectrograms for the left and right ears of a binaural recording. And those are the echoes. You can see that they're slightly different too, because you're getting these different sounds received at either ear. So that's at one viewpoint. And of course, then we can start rotating that camera and do it everywhere, any position, any orientation. And as we change the orientation of the camera at that position, at each place, I'm getting a different RGB view, RGBD, and then different echoes. All right, so this is just collecting this kind of echo-based observations of a scene, kind of physically interact, receive these echoes. And then here's what we do with it. We want to train a representation that will embed the smarts of the echoes into the visual encoder. And so the premise for this learning task that we put forth is to learn the visual encoder such that it's can expose and makes it predictable whether the echo and the vision stream are consistent. So you come in with the RGB, what the agent sees, we're going to learn the encoder there. You come in with the binaural audio, we're going to learn an encoder there. But when we come in with these paired examples, that echo will either go with the visual or it won't. And so it'll go with, meaning it's from the same orientation as the visual was captured, or it'll be from some offset orientation. And so the self-supervised task is to take both those modalities, fuse them, and then predict which of those orientations is it. Do they agree? And if not, at which angle are they wrong? Okay, so we can supervise that using the data I just described. And the question is, why would this yield a good visual encoder? Why do we think it would? It's because if you're going to answer the question, do these echoes that I'm hearing go with what I'm seeing? Then to know this, you'll have to be extracting from that visual stream those big, gross or coarse 3D cues that are possibly observable in the RGB in order to know if it's going with the echoes you receive that have that spatial component. So think of the audio as kind of ripping out of the image those things that are responsible for changing echoes shape based on the scene. Okay, so we train this with an echolocating agent like I just showed, and then we think that the kind of the strong output of it, or the product is that we care about, is this RGB visual encoder. Because now we have something that's brought in the intelligence of the audio, but now we can use it to encode any new image, even one that doesn't have audio, let alone echoes. And so what we did is take the encoder that we've learned this way from sound spaces in simulation, and then try to tackle a monocular depth estimation task. And we can tackle this using a state-of-the-art model here from Hu and colleagues, where if we were to just train it from scratch, we'll get the depth estimates you see here from single view estimates. And then if you were to just pre-train and start their model using the visual echoes encoder that we've just trained, you'll get the bottom row. So these are cleaner, more accurate depth images for what are real world test samples. These are just images from the NYU V2 data set, no audio input. And so this is some example of sim to real transfer. You learned in the sound spaces environments, which were real world environments, but we've rendered the audio. Now over here, you're looking at real world images and have improved your ability to estimate depth. Okay, and so we saw this for depth prediction, better than scratch training, even, doing some reasonable things with respect to heavily supervised pre-training. And then we did this across different tests that I mentioned. So surface normals, visual navigation, and we saw some good consistency of the quality you get from the representation from this echo-based pre-training. Cool. So the audio coming to the aid of the visual encoder and helping us understand the depth of the scene, which I've been calling kind of the shape of the scene and the big surfaces around me. In the next example, I want to talk about kind of a projection of that information. So we're interested in the floor plan of the environment. That too is a good kind of summary of where are the big things, where are the rooms, walls, big furniture. We care a lot about this for mapping. And the question is, how can we do this well? Well, we can do it really well with vision if we have that camera dragged around all over the place. Right? The more this camera sees, that map is going to be quite good with current models. But the less it sees, there'll be big chunks of the space that are just not recoverable, not mappable, which makes a lot of sense. But if you bring in the audio, the idea we have is that there'll be two ways in which that audio could help you complete that map. So one way is just the pure geometry. So if I hear echoes, if I hear the reverberation, bouncing around behind me, even though I never point the camera there, it's going to indicate that there's some free space. And then the second way is semantic. So if I hear a TV over there and some water running over here, this suggests the kind of objects and the kind of rooms that may be present even behind walls that I'm not able to go behind in the video capture that I have. So we put forth this task to try and learn how to go from a short video, meaning a short sequence of frames accompanied by audio, to produce, occupancy map, like the top binary map, or even a room labeled map that says, where's the kitchen, where's the bathroom, et cetera. We want to try to get this more omnidirectional and more broad view of the space using the audio. So the way we trained audiovisual floor plans is in a supervised manner. So we have samples like I've been showing you from these various 3D environments or home environments, and we could train a multimodal model and cross-modal model looking at the visual and the audio streams, top and bottom here, to do some encoding and then decode back out to a floor plan map, which is the binary maps you see on the right-hand side. And you do this kind of a step at a time, each time getting another glimpse of the possible floor plan around you, and then stitching those together over time to make a full map of the space. Now, of course, so a baseline here would be, what do I do when I just map it in the normal way using vision? And then how much better can we do using what we can anticipate from the audio? So here's an example at a freeze frame where on the left, you see the 3D environment, and on top are the camera positions with the orange cones. If you just did mapping based on what you can observe, you'll get that cyan region. And if you map using the audio visual together, you'll get the light green region that's there. So a much broader area. And you can see that playing out on the right too. These are just top-down projections of what was output, and they're color-coded green and black. Those are true positives and true negatives. So you'd like this map to be all green and black. And then we have false positives, false negatives, and red and blue. And what I'm comparing here on the top is what we can get with the audiovisual map to the one on the bottom that is a vision-only approach, but a smart one, like a vision-only approach that knows how to anticipate beyond just the depth or pixels that it observes. So it has learned how to extrapolate common patterns in 3D environments that would be good guesses based on the visual alone. And nonetheless, despite those good guesses on the visual anticipation, you can see how much more complete and accurate the AV map can be. So we'll look at a dynamic example here using sound spaces, and you'll watch the map unfold as you hear some kind of busy household sound, so different sounding objects in the environment. Okay, so you see that coming out on the right-hand side, where the cyan again is the vision only kind of baseline, what we would normally do, and then how much fuller the map can get using the audio in this learned manner. Okay, so what I've shown you in this example is how audio has this appeal that we're going to be able to see geometry in a broader way than we would looking at our images. So there's more omnidirectional content, broader content, much more distant content that we get in the map. And I've shown, and well, at least I've hinted at how the cues about the semantics will be there too. So you hear the water, you figure it's either bathroom or kitchen. There's another element of audio that I haven't emphasized yet that can be right in here as well. And it's cheaper. So power-wise, it's going to cost a lot more to be running a camera all the time as we do any of these tasks compared to running listening on a microphone. So audio has a lot of appeal to be an always-on kind of sensor to couple with our camera. Could we be more selective about when we're deploying the camera if we understand the interrelationship of the audio-visual and we're always listening to the audio? So this was our motivation to kind of build from what I just showed you in the space of the mapping. So we want to consider mapping on an energy budget. Okay, so we'll also bring in a different kind of sound source here, people. So people talking, they are a sounding object, they move. So that's nice too. So you're getting observations over time. So in this approach, I'll show you right here, it's called chat to map because you have people chatting, at least two people wearing microphones, they could be on augmented reality glasses. They're talking, they're moving the environment, and we're going to compute from those streams a shared map, just meaning one map of the environment based on their two streams of observation. So two people here wearing the glasses, wearing the microphones. And then over time, they'll be collecting potentially the visual stream as well as the audio stream. Okay, and then here's kind of the key insight, trying to leverage what I just mentioned about energy. We want to intelligently select when to turn on the camera to sample frames. So again, the microphones are always on, but let's just be a lot more selective about when we need to take a picture. Okay, and so we'll be, at every movement or every time step, we'll be selecting whether we are going to capture a video frame. Okay. So let me tell you a little bit more about what the approach looks like to achieve that. So to do that intelligent selection, we turn to reinforcement learning, and we're going to train a policy that will make the action choice of yes, take a frame, or no, don't take a frame. And so your inputs to this are the things we just looked at. If you've selected to take it, then the visual input as well as the camera pose, and then every time the audio. And these color audios are indicating this is mixed audio. So you're hearing yourself, or in the egocentric view, you're also hearing the person speaking around you, and those come together into one audio signal. And they'll sound different from your egocentric perspective and someone else's. Okay, so at every time step then, we're gonna push these observations into a sampling policy that we've trained with reinforcement learning in order to get good at knowing when to take the next frame or when to skip it safely. In fact, in particular, the reward that we give this policy is to say two things. One, how much does the visual at that time step help? So the bigger the delta is in the quality of the map, whether I have the visual or I didn't, that would be the corresponding reward is higher if the visual is helping a lot. So I'll reward getting frames when they're going to be useful. And then there's a penalty here to say, don't keep repeating a sample of the visual on the same pose, meaning the camera pose. Okay, so that'll be a penalty against that reward. And this is what we're encouraging the behavior of getting good frames that have a payoff for the map, and having this prior not to keep sampling the same frames. So that's a policy that makes this decision every time step along the way. And then we have a shared scene mapper related to the encoder decoder transformer-based model like I showed before, but now using the multi-ego inputs in order to create one single map. Okay, and over here the loss is like before, which is to say make the map correct. All right, so this is the idea for chat to map. Let me give you one example. Here's a top-down view of a 3D environment. Here is an orange person, meaning their trajectory and the camera views that they could take are here. And then here's the second person in blue. And here's one trajectory.
It seemed to him that he was already on the other side of the wall.
There might be a change
And
in the
he
weather
no longer.
in vain.
Okay,
A maid
so
servant entered.
these are not your best conversations.
Did I mess up?
Okay, on Zoom, is it audible now? Think so. Okay, great, thank you. So there's the map on the output on the right, and the color coding similar to what I showed you before, kind of showing false and true, positives and negatives. The thing I want to call out about this map is the green blob of furniture on the top right. That's not at all observed using the vision, so it's never seen. I mean, the camera never pointed at it, but it's sensed through the audio shared mapping. And I'll talk about the energy savings in just a minute. Okay, but so what we did here is kind of energy efficient mapping using conversation as like an opportunistic sensing vehicle from people and conversation as they move about the space. The mapper itself is doing fine. So if we just measure the mapping quality against baselines, like the models I kind of referred to just a few moments ago, like including the AB floor plan we looked at. So it's mapping well. In fact, it's even having an improvement in the quality of the map, both in simulation, like we've been looking in my example, but also in real world collection where we can do the same thing. Of course, the real world, we can't miss that the F1 score dips down once we move to the real world environment with new challenges there. But most important for the results here is looking at the behavior or the quality of the active mapping. So you have on the left, again, simulated data, on the right, real world data. And these curves are looking at how accurate does the map get as you take more steps. So as time goes forward. And you would like this to be a sharp curve because that means you're not spending a lot of time, not a lot of observations, but you're getting a good map. And of course you want it to be a high curve too. And so you can see that our results are in green. Other things you could do that would be very reasonable are in the other colors, like red, just always optimize to select unique poses for your camera views, because that would be a good way not to be wasteful about your camera use. Greedy, just like use all the camera views early on in the sequence. Or blue, just be deciding when to turn the camera on and off randomly. So we have a good budge there as far as achieving these quality maps with fewer observations and less power. And the estimates we can make for both these cases are, on the left 74 watts, on the right 37 watts of savings. Even after you account for the overhead of running this policy to make these decisions, you're saving that much power by being very selective with your camera use. Of course, the enabler here was the audio. So there's plenty of ways in which this can still fail, and some of the ones that we observed is when we select these views, and yes, they're kind of good in spanning the space, but there's too little overlap, and the model fails to kind of accumulate them well into the map. Or we do see behavior sometimes where the model will just choose to kind of over select at the onset and then run out of tokens, basically, so it can't make a map that's better later. Or if there's like too little motion by those chatting people, like if they're not realizing that we're trying to opportunistically get these maps from their conversation and they're in one place, then we won't have as full of a map. Cool, so this is the bit I wanted to share on 3D surroundings, and now I'll talk about what happens when we want to model the effects of these environments on speech in a couple particular ways. And I want to motivate this by the fact that speech analysis, is so valuable in a variety of spaces. And the fact it's valuable in a variety of spaces means it has to be robust and aware of very different physical environments, including where a speaker is quite far from a microphone. And there's different geometries in the scene around. So that can be hard though, because we just saw, some of my earlier sketches of how much reverberation can happen as a function of the environment, which means it's not just the direct sound you're going to receive, it's also all these reverberations. And so what happens, think of the drums example I showed you at the onset. Here's a snapshot of the same idea for human speech, where if I say something in an anechoic chamber on the left, okay, I'll observe a certain waveform or spectrogram down at the bottom that's kind of very, very clean. And if I do the same spoken content in a big cathedral, then the waveform or spectrogram are going to be correspondingly very different You can see that kind of blurring left to right from the reverberation. And this is, this can be hard for human listeners, and it can certainly be hard for machine listeners too, especially say if you're trying to understand, recognize the speech that's there. Now, at the same time, we see a possibility here, which is, in existing work in de-reverberation, where you might learn to clean up such an input. So take the reverberant observation and then try to strip away those effects into what was the latent clean source. You can think about learning that for sure, and it has been done in using audio alone. And this will limit us then, might under-constrain the task. So our idea is, to open our eyes and look at where the speaker is in order to anticipate the reverberation effects. Because if we do that, then we'll have a sense of how to remove, implicitly how to remove the effects of that room impulse response function. So AAS, this is the source sound, the clean one, the room impulse response on the bottom. So they've been convolved behind the scenes, and now you're observing this reverberant audio AR. And we just want to get rid of that and learn a function that will return AS, the clean source. And we'll do this from single channel audio. So I wasn't going to go in detail on this model. We train this in a supervised way using the kind of data I've been showing you generated now, but with people in it. So you can see in the panorama on the top right, there's a tiny person from afar in the panorama, I think wearing a suit, if you can see. And so there'll be people in there. That'll be a visual cue that should help this process, as well as the geometry and the materials that we see in the picture. So we rendered speech from a public data set called LibreSpeech. In these environments, we can generate these sounds with and without reverberation. So there you go. You have a nicely paired training set. You can learn to strip away the reverberant effects in order to return your estimate of the clean source. So let me show you an example. Here's one. Here's the reverberant speech first.
Chase drives away. Mary stands bewildered and perplexed on the doorstep.
And here's our dereverberated output.
As the chase drives away, Mary stands bewildered and perplexed on the doorstep.
And because of our audio in the room, you may or may not hear it. I do think you can see it in the spectrogram, right? You can see the cleaning that's happened there. Show you one more. This is some real data captured on campus at UT. Here is reverberant.
However, that was over now. The tree gone. The story has an end.
And then the output.
However, that was over now. The tree gone. The story has an end.
So speech with drama, just for your enjoyment, dereverberated. But what happens to the ASR? So I kind of motivated this by saying, well, we'd like to hear cleaner speech, but also our machines may need to hear cleaner speech in order to do good automatic speech recognition. And so does this play out this way? So let me show you one example here. The clean audio is like this.
Two monsters only were creating all this commotion, and before my eyes are two reptiles of the primitive world.
But so ASR, not a problem. It's 100% right there. But now if we observe the reverberant audio.
Two monsters only were creating all this commotion, and before my eyes are two reptiles of the primitive world.
Okay, so it really falls apart. That's the word error rate, 36.8.
Two monsters only were creating all this commotion, and before my eyes are two reptiles of the primitive world.
Okay, so that would be a baseline using only the audio. So when we add the vision on this example, we get a very nice output. And listen here.
Two monsters only were creating all this commotion, and before my eyes are two reptiles of the primitive world.
Okay, so we ace that one. And so really removing the reverberation well, and then doing, recovering the speech recognition. And just here's another example unfolded of just the same type. And so this happens, not just on an example or two, but across the board, for the task of speech recognition, which here I'm showing in the center, as well as tasks like speech enhancement or on the left or speaker verification on the right. We can quantify these effects. Here, this is actually on real data. So again, taking a sim to real transfer trained with sound spaces, but applied to these real videos, we're getting some good results overall. You'll notice that for two of these three tasks, the very best happens with the model I just described. For speech enhancement, you can get more like quality sounding speech using this metric GAN approach. However, quality speech doesn't equate to maintaining the content, and so, or even the tone or other properties of speech. And you can see that it correspondingly was suffering in speaker verification or also speech recognition. Cool. So this is where we're able to, get rid of the room, right? So we had audio, the effects of the room were messing it up, and we learned to get rid of the room. But we care about the reverse as well. So if you remember at the beginning, I showed this video, I'm not going to play again, run drum kit, 5 different spaces. This was like transporting, like manually, a sound that was observed somewhere else. And we got to see, oh yeah, it does sound very different. These effects can be major, like that were depicted here. They can also be subtle. And you and I are tending to be very sensitive to them. So sounds that don't sound like they belong, we will notice. And so this flip side of the application, rather than get rid of the room effects, there's times where we want to add them. And so we've been exploring this in the space, what's called acoustic matching. So this is where, this is an existing problem. You say, I've got audio captured in location 1. I wish it sounded like it was captured in location 2. You could want this for augmented reality where, you're actually recording in some studio or your home, but I want it to sound like you're in the room with me. Or film dubbing, the actor recorded, but it really would be better if it sounds like they did so in that church. Or finally, video conferencing, where I've got a cool background. And if my audio doesn't jive with my background, there'll be a cognitive dissonance for you. Okay, and so this is a neat problem. I'm putting the visuals, but in the past, it's really been tackled on the audio only dimension. So here's our idea. Let's make this visual acoustic matching. Let's use all those properties I've been telling you so far today about what we see in imagery that suggests how sounds will be in order to transport a sound from one location to another. So what that means is we'll come in as input with a picture and a waveform, and our output is another waveform that's resynthesized in order to match the target environment shown in the picture. Okay, so maybe your source audio is you tap dancing around on in an empty or in a carpeted room. I'm not sure why you're tap dancing in a carpeted room right now, but if you did, and then we're going to transform that sound into, this great grand hall based on the picture as the input. Okay, so that's the goal we set up for visual acoustic matching. And there's something cool about the method that I want to highlight. Because so far in the reverberation, I just showed you the de-reverb, it was supervised, and we did so in simulation. And we're happy because we can do that, nicely, cleanly in simulator. That's part of its value. But we're not happy because it also, if we're restricted to having that pairing of, clean audio and unclean audio, then this is kind of rare in the real world, or at least takes a lot of effort to get either simulated or a lot of effort to get manually. So we had an idea of how we might be able to get these pairings in order to train the visual acoustic matching from just video. Okay, so you're just observing speech and video like this frame here, and you hear the audio target. So this is what that person sounds like in that environment. Okay, that's a target sound. You could say, well, let's get rid of that room. So let's apply some automatic de-reverberation and come back with this automatic output. And that's the first thing we tried. And we said, well, now we would have, pairs we could start to try and learn. But we quickly realized that there's still evidence of the room in that output. I mean, the de-reverberation is not perfect. And so you are having residue from the room, which is not going to allow you to learn how to do this transport that I just described. So the idea we had was to make this more self-supervised process is to convolve that de-reverberated output next with a random room. So yes, there's like residue effects from the original room, but let's convolve with another room impulse response, some random IR, to move it to some other unknown space. And then a bit of more noise, so this acoustic alteration. And now what we've arrived at is a self-supervised way to come up with some paired data where I observe the real speech in the real environment and get this target, but then I have this mismatched environment on that target. And now I can start to learn how to transport it from where it is in the source to where I want it to be in the target. So this was cool because it opened up from, sound spaces kind of training, even though, that's many, many environments, lots of variety. But now we can take raw video, and we took some data set called AV speech that has, people talking and doing things, all sorts of visual environments, and we can train directly on web videos. Okay, so we put together a model then using this idea. Here we have, again, a variant of a cross-modal encoder taking the visual target, as well as the source audio, which might be anechoic or might just have some other room in which it was captured. That's the S, and then we'll train in order to produce the correct target. And if it's supervised from a simulator, that's what it is, but otherwise we'll be employing this acoustics alteration that I just mentioned in order to have a mismatch environment on the source and target. Okay, we call it avatar for audiovisual transformer for audio generation. And here's some results. And I'm going to show you first the audio input, and then I'm going to transport that audio to 3 different locations. Okay, so here's the original audio.
Stuff it into you, his belly counseled.
I might back up just to make sure you heard.
Stuff it into you, his belly counseled.
And then here's environment 1, an office,
Stuff it into you, his belly counseled.
garage.
Stuff it into you, his belly counseled.
Now turn in.
Stuff it into you, his belly counseled.
So I hope you could hear that. It can be subtle, but I think you could hear how as the environment got larger and differently shaped, different materials, even the reverb time that you're hearing and the amount of reverberation you are hearing is increasing. And that's just automatic from the model output, takes the waveform, takes the picture, and then decides or anticipates how the sound would be if you moved it into that space. And then let's look at kind of suggestive examples for some of the applications I mentioned. So maybe you observed your original speech would be like this, and then let's move it into the room. So original.
If a man had stolen a pound in his youth.
And then we'll move it to the room.
If a man had stolen a pound in his youth.
I hope you could hear it sounds a little bit warmer and rounder by looking at this homey environment and inserting the sound. And here's a second example. The video conference example, so say this was your original speech.
Yea, his honorable worship is within.
And now we asked to put it in your Zoom background.
Yea, his honorable worship is within.
I think you could hear a little bit more reverberation from those clean surfaces and high ceilings. Okay, so those are all examples. We've evaluated this on the 2 kinds of data I've been talking about, sound spaces, as well as this YouTube drawn video from the AV speech data set. And overall, measurably seeing that we can start to match the environments that are targeted in the image. Okay. All right, so finally then, I've shown you how we start to learn about the 3D environments, mapping, getting the depths and the sense of the scene from echoes, and then we start worrying about the interplay between the environment, the acoustics, and speech, spoken content. In this final little bit, let's just look at this in noisier places. We originally started looking at this classic problem, the cocktail problem, where you could try to remove background sounds using both what you hear and what you see. So, the noisy stuff.
It's cut down the noise to a point where I haven't measured it, but it's cut down the noise to a point where we have the right vibe that it's an action kind of place.
Okay, so that would be an original. And
haven't measured
we
it,
can
but
undo
it's
that.
cut down the noise to a point where we have the right vibe that it's an action kind of place.
Okay, so in this problem, you're trying to focus the attention of the listener. You want to remove the background sounds and do audio source separation to hear the speaker of interest. And there's lots of interest to do this in video. But in that case, you're looking at a passive problem, right? You've got the video, do your best to get out that target speech. And so what we've been exploring is kind of the embodied intelligence version of this problem, which is new. So in active audiovisual source separation, our thought was to let what we see and what we hear guide an agent that moves around intelligently in order to do better source separation. And I do think we do this, right? So we're good at cocktail party, we can focus our attention, but we also move our bodies, right? So imagine like this this curious fellow, who's leaning out, using his body to get a different measurement to his ears to hear something better. Or you might be in the airport and there's an announcement and you kind of walk just far enough so that you're going to hear that over the bustle of everything else. Okay, so we have this idea that embodied agents should be able to learn to do this. Not to just go find the target, audiovisual navigation, but to move in the space such that the target source is best audible to them. And what we learned through the results here is that's not the same. So going to the target is not always the best. In fact, what the agent's going to need to do, if say there's 3 sound sources in this environment, and maybe our agent started at the star, it would need to move intelligently in a way that, say, source 3 is really clearly heard and easy to separate from the rest. And it doesn't mean just sitting on source 3, but actually using the environment around you to dampen other sounds and to better focus on ones over the other. Okay. And so we treat this in a reinforcement learning approach. We train a policy, again, not to learn to get to the target fast, but to learn to make movements that make separation better. And so the key thing you need to know for this is that, continually taking the audio and visual, we're starting to estimate a mask on the input audio to remove everything but the target. And the key is that we're going to reward the motion of this agent based on separation quality, meaning audio source separation. Okay. So here's an agent doing that. It's going to hear the mixed audio and it's just a mess. And then I'll show you what it's able to separate because it moves intelligently. Okay, this one's very soft for some reason here. I'll show you, you can see that the agent is going to keep emitting its estimate of the target audio for one of the sources, and it's moving to get there. And let me just show you what that output sounds like then.
Time of our meeting drew nigh. Ralph called on me first, the most common question, without asking me first. During this time to Miss Reed. I had a great respect and affection. Time of our meeting drew nigh. Ralph.
Okay, stop. So I think you could get a hint of how embedded in all the mess of the sound, the agent was moving in a way that its own estimates of the target become a lot clearer. And that's what we can measure as far as, over time, how clear is the true sound. So high and sharp is good here as well. And we can do this better with this learned policy that we've called move to here, better than just trying to move to different spaces, but moving randomly, or even a proximity prior, where we try to stay around the sounding thing because we know where it is. So this was encouraging step for kind of moving beyond agents that move to get somewhere, to find an object, to find a source, to agents that are moving for their speech understanding or for their isolation in particular of something of interest over everything else. Okay, so this is what I've shown you today and some of the attached papers to these and related things that our group is doing. And I'm going to conclude the talk here, also highlighting all the folks involved with the work I showed you today, and in particular in yellow, all the students and first authors of the pieces of work that I just shared, Chana and Rohan, Sagnik, and Senthil. All right, thank you so much. Would be so happy to have any comments or questions.
Thank you for this wonderful talk. I guess I'll get started. I had like so many questions during the presentation. So I guess like the first question is, I saw that you're representing like the sound via like the spectrogram. Are there any is there any like consideration to render like the phase information as opposed to just the amplitude information of both of the 2 years?
Yeah. So we explored a couple different things. So you're right. Sometimes there's a spectrogram input, and then sometimes we're actually working directly with the waveforms. More recently, especially in the synthesis, that proved to be most valuable. But even with the spectrograms, we're estimating complex spectrograms and estimating the phase. So. Yeah.
Yeah, really interesting. Thank you. So I like this idea at the end that you can actively move to get a better estimate of the sound. And then I was also thinking about the earlier example where you can click or produce some sound to get a better estimate of something. Have you tried to somehow emit sound in order to better hear? or, like the agents were talking in the chat bot part, they're emitting sound to get some sense of geometry, but yeah, would that be something that could work? Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. We have looked into this. So the version we've looked into is deciding when to emit a sound. So if you have some value of being quiet sometimes, so like if sound is considered intrusive, like, click, click, click all the way around the environment, maybe it's too much. So you can be selective there. As well as even we were trying to target what's the optimal sound to emit, so you could think that, given if you're like perfect in knowledge, like there's the right sound that'll be most informative. So could you actively select that? And I think on the second one, it's, on both, you can see some leverage. I think the second one continues to be a bit harder. Kind of what we expect is like the fullest frequency sweep just tends to be the most rich thing to issue. But if there are other things at play, like including this intrusiveness aspect, you could think about how, well, it's still useful that I get a sound that's least intrusive and still good for, say, mapping or source separation. Yep.
Okay.
Thank you for the great talk. I'm curious about the work about reverberation, RIP1. So in that case, basically there's some two kind of, so the target is making a clean sound in the first half. In the later, although the later part is given the image, whether we can convert to the sound that is suitable for that. Regarding the first half, making the clean sound, maybe this is because I'm not familiar with this field, but I feel like that seems like pretty similar to what the goal of the super resolution. Given the very low resolution image, making a high resolution image, at that point the data is created as two different camera, which is very good camera, HDR camera to take a photo, and the other is just normal camera. So that means that can we think about the way to apply the super resolution techniques to those kind of making a good RIR function to making a clean sound, or do you think that it is totally different? I'm talking about you from the spectrogram side, because the spectrogram is also to the image. So.
Yeah, I see that analogy. Yeah, it's interesting. Could you adopt things like, the last I read in super resolution was kind of strong on kind of patch-based models looking. And so maybe taking those kind of approach with this could be interesting. And maybe what you're getting at too is could it alleviate supervision requirements at the same time, right? Just more inferring the latent clean. Yeah, it's an interesting thought. And I haven't seen that done, but I can see the analogy for sure. Yeah.
I think there's a question on Zoom as well.
Yeah,
if you
in
could,
the chat or?
Yeah, I think so, in chat.
Okay.
Well, if you could repeat.
Okay, yeah. So have you looked into the behavior of the audiovisual models when the audio and visual inputs contradict one another? Yeah, I wonder, so for contradict, I think this is a question from Fernanda. When they contradict each other, meaning they're not physically correct, or
I think. Yeah, I was thinking of scenarios where you might have multiple sources in the scene, but you might have a system that infers, let's say, two sources, and yet one of the signals, either the video or the audio, are reflective of another physical scenario in the scene. I guess I'm wondering if there are any predictions for whether the system would behave in a way that the human perceptual systems would behave when signals like these are presented. Like, I think in humans, we are biased to attribute the sounds that we're hearing to the videos that we're looking at, even though they might not match exactly. So I'm wondering if something like this would occur.
I see. Okay. So like whether the automatic models are sensitive to or surprised by maybe disconnection between the two streams. Yeah. I can't think of an example, like looking at the results where to kind of point to right now. I think the visual acoustic matching work is really motivated by this kind of from the human side. how jarring it is, even very subtle, wrong aspects about the audio versus the visual stimulus, how jarring that can be. But yeah, I can't think from the models of a great example where I see, I guess, models being confused by the same in the same way as people. That's an interesting question. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. Thanks everyone. If you have more questions, please feel free to reach out or ask offline. And thank you so much for this great talk.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone. So many questions.
Awesome.
Yeah, that's great. I hope the sound came out well.
Yeah, it's a bit of a
Fun.
yeah.